In this video, we'll be taking a look at a network diagram for project management. Sometimes a network diagram is called a PERT chart or a PERT diagram. Stands for Program, Review, Evaluation Technique. Kind of an old term, but still used. I still hear it tossed around today. However, most people just call it a network diagram. In previous lessons we've had a look at the scope and the work breakdown structure. And the work breakdown structure can be quite comprehensive or it can be quite simple. It really depends on the project and who's on the team, who was in the brainstorming session. The work breakdown structure, of course, we have to look at the individual activities and tasks, what sort of costs are associated with those, and if possible come up with some sort of a guesstimate for the time duration for each activity. I've got a bit of a WBS work breakdown structure here. I've labelled the activities A, B, C, D, E, F, G and H. I've got the descriptions for the activities written here. And preceding activities, it's important to understand that with a network diagram, activities on the left-hand side of the diagram by convention precede the activity directly on the right-hand side of that. And that succeeds the next activity on the right-hand side of it. So we have these preceding and succeeding activities in our network diagram. To save time, I've already sort of done this work breakdown structure and taped it on the board, and I've gone ahead and I've put each one of these activities onto a bit of sticky note. And this sticky note idea is so commonly used in doing PERT charts and other types of flow charts. Even with programming we do flow charts, and I love to use these sticky notes. Even somebody writing a novel, you see they've got all their ideas for the novel plastered all over the wall using sticky notes. So activity A, which is the application approval, there's actually no preceding activity for activity A. So I'm going to put activity A right over here on the far left hand side. But activity A feeds into activity B, activity C and activity D. That can be seen there because if you look at the preceding activities, we have A and A. This is activity A, so it precedes all of those three that come after it. So that's B. Put him up there a bit. C and D. Alright, so now we've got A, B, C and D plastered pretty well in the positions I think where they'll go. They might not be the final positions yet. It'll depend when I take a look back at the chart and just see how much space I've got on the board to play with and where the connecting arrows have to go. But I'll put them there for the time being and hope for the best. Activity E, staff reporting. Activity E follows activity B and C. Well, there's B and C, so we'll have a go at putting activity E there. Activity F, commission approval. It follows B, C and D. B, C and D. We might put that up there just for the time being. Activity G, wait for construction, follows F. Let's put that there. And lastly, H, occupancy, follows both E and G. So maybe we can put the down here a little bit. Now, right, I think that's not looking too bad, but we haven't got the arrows on it yet, so let's put some arrows on that. Okay, we said that A goes to B, goes to C, and comes to D. We said that E, staff report, was preceded by B and C. Now just while I'm putting these arrows on, a couple of other terms that are pretty common with network diagrams or PERT charts. This is called a burst, when we have one activity that feeds into multiple following activities or successor activities. That's a burst. And when we have two or more activities that feed into one activity, that's called a merge. So I've got a merge happening here, and the two arrows coming down just into E. What does D? D comes to A, E, staff report, B and C, F. F, commission approval, B, C and D. B, C and D. A little bit messy to draw that one, but we'll have a go at it. There's D, B, C. There's not a great deal of rules as far as the arrows go on these diagrams. It's perfectly acceptable to cross over another arrow, especially when you're in the infancy of putting together a PERT chart like I'm doing here. You know, I might be able to stand back from that in 5 minutes time and look at it and say, oh, I've made a mess with that, how about I just rearrange a couple of the boxes. But I think for what we're doing here, that's fine. That's not looking too bad at all. G had a preceding activity of F, so that's a nice little short one. And H had a preceding activity of both E and G. E. You can see again I've had no choice but to cross over that other arrow, but they're not connected. You've just got to understand that. Okay, now it's time to put some details onto these sticky notes. I've got a master detail up here showing ES for early start, SL for slack, LS for late start, EF for early finish, LF for late finish, DUR for duration, ID for the identification. You can see I've already got the IDs on them, A, B, C, D, etc. But I haven't got, I've got the description, I haven't got any durations. We came up in a brainstorming meeting with these durations here. They're what we call our best guess durations. And we'll go ahead then and we'll put those best guess durations. I'm going to do them on the whiteboard below the sticky notes because they might change. I'm not sure at this point in time. So just to keep my sticky notes clean, I'll draw these other details on the whiteboard. So activity A, application approval, we've got a duration time or an activity duration, if you like, of 5. Construction plans B, we have a duration of 15. Traffic study, we have a duration of 10. D, service availability, we have a duration of 5. E, staff report, we have a duration of 15. F, the approval, we have a duration of 10. G, waiting for construction, that's a big one, 170. And occupancy, 35. I think that does it. Okay, all of our durations are now all of the durations are now attached to each sticky note. Okay, what about the early start? That's the next thing that we'll go ahead and do. Under the early start, there's nothing for the first activity. It doesn't have a preceding activity, it doesn't have an early start. It's got a duration of 5. So that duration becomes the earliest finish time. Again, I'll write these outside of the sticky notes just to make it a bit cleaner on the board in case I need to change it later. And that 5 for an early finish comes up to be the early start for B, early start for C, and an early start for D. The earliest finish for B is going to be the early start plus the duration. So 5 plus 15 is 20. Again, the earliest finish time for the traffic study will be the early start plus the duration will be 15. And down in D, a little bit messy here. I'm starting to get a little bit of a mess. I can see that I've got that off to the side and I've got that above, but I've got some constraints here with the whiteboard, as you can see. D, the early start is 5, the duration is 5, so the early finish will be 10. And then this 20 for the earliest finish comes across here for an early start of 20. The earliest that can start in this network diagram is at time 20. Now, when I look at the early start on activity F, commission approval is preceded by 3 other activities. It's preceded by B, it's preceded by C, and it's preceded by D. B has an early finish of 20, C has an early finish of 15, and D has an early finish of 10. We have to take the largest early finish time and translate it across to here. It'd be no good taking a smaller value because F can't start until B is finished, and B is a duration of 20. So it has the longest duration, so the earliest that can start, ES, early start, has to be 20 to match what's coming out of B. So we just ignore the 15 coming out of C, we ignore the 10 that's coming out of D. Okay, we've got a duration of 10, we've got an early start of 20, 20 plus 10 makes 30 for an early finish. Earliest we can finish is 30. There's only one thing feeding into activity G, so we don't have to do like I just did. I don't have to have a look at it and say we need the largest out of the 3. There's only one activity preceding it, so this is going to have an early start of 30. Activity H. Now activity H, we need to first of all look at what's happening with activity E. Activity E is fed by 2 preceding activities. So it's got a 20 and it's got a 15. So it's going to be a 20 because we need the largest out of those 2, not the smallest. I've taken the 20 from the early finish on B because B feeds into E, C feeds into E. C had an early finish of 15, so the 15 we can't use there because 20 is bigger than 15. We've got 20 for an early start on E. We've got 15 for a duration. That gives us 35. 35 for the earliest finish on E. That 35 then comes across to occupancy. But we have two things feeding into occupancy. Its preceding activities are G and E, so we have to take the larger of the two. We've got 35 for an early finish here, but we've got 30 plus 170, 200 here. 200 is much, much bigger than 35, so the 200 comes down to here. And we ignore the 35, which we've got there. So the final time duration for this PERT chart is then going to be the 200 plus the 35 to give us 235 for an early finish on occupancy. What I've just done is a forward pass going through this. I've started from the left hand side and I've gone across to the right hand side. We're going to come back in a different colour and we're going to do a backward pass back through, and then we're going to do a little bit of maths between the backward pass and the forward pass to show me where the critical path is on the diagram. And you can probably see already where the critical path is. The critical path is going to be the longest activities, because if they blow out just by 1 day or 1 hour, they stretch the end duration, which is 235. So, alright, change colour pen and then we'll come back and we'll do the backward pass. So with the backwards pass, what we have to do is we have to subtract the duration from the late finish time to give the late start time. Before we go ahead and do that though, I've put a circle around. I've put 235 as a late finish here, and I put a red circle around it, and I said that's kind of normal that the early finish and the late finish are going to be the same value, but if there were multiple projects happening at once and the overall project manager wanted the late finish time from a different project to tally up with the late finish time here, they might borrow that number. It could be like 300 or 400 days and plug that in here, and then you'd have to work with that in the backward pass. But we'll keep things simple and we'll just treat the early finish and the late finish as one and the same in this scenario. So if we minus the 35 from 235, that gives me 200. 200 here for the late start. And notice the early start and the late start are the same value. That's quite important. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now this 200 I can bring over here, and my late finish I can put as 200. Note, 200 for the late finish, but 35 for the early finish. Now they're not the same. We can bring that late start of 200 across to be the late finish for wait for construction, and I'll just squeeze 200 in there. 200. 200 and 200, same. 200, 35, not the same. We have to do a subtraction between these two. That 200 minus the 35 is going to leave me with what's called slack time. And 200 minus 35 is 165. And I have to squeeze some slack time in here. I put an arrow to it. 165. That was, of course, LF minus EF. However, we can do it another way. The 200 minus the duration gives me the late start. So the late start is 185. 185. Just like I subtracted EF from LF to get the slack time, I can subtract ES from LS to get that 165 as well. 185 minus 20, 165. I got 165. And what that means is that slack time, it means that there's something else in the diagram which is taking a lot of time, and this only takes a short amount of time, 15. This can be moved that way or that way on a timeline, and it won't affect the project at all. In fact, if we had somebody that was working on that was fairly precious as far as their qualifications and input to the project, but they were needed on another project, we could loan them out to the other project and we could just shift this staff report up and down to balance it out. Slack time. Alright, so continuing with the Backwoods Pass then. 200 minus 170 equals 30. 30 there for a late finish. Late start, late finish, both going to be the same then. 30 minus 10, this is going to be 20. How can I squeeze that in? 20 in this square here. 20 and 20 are the same, so there's no slack time in that. 30, 30, same, 0 slack time there. 200, 200, same, 0 slack time there. As we saw, 185, 20, big difference, 165 days of slack time. That can be moved around quite easily. Alright, continuing on. We're looking at the shortest path in this Backwoods Pass. So we have 20 in this square here. I'll bring that around to give me 20 in this, because remember this was the result of a merge. Yes, a merge. We had three things merging to give me this. So in the Backwoods Pass, we have to do a burst. And I can take that 20, I can put 20 in there, 20 in there, and 20 in there. 20 minus 5 is 15. 15 minus 5 is 10. I've got some slack time in this square here. Service check. I can move that around a little bit and adjust it in the overall project without making any difference to the end time for the project. 20 minus 10 is 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. I have a slack time here of 5 days. 20 minus 15 is 5. 5 minus 5 is 0. I have no slack time in this construction plans. Okay, so I have to bring across the smallest of these three because this was a burst. I have to merge these now to get a value to go in here for the late finish, and that's going to be a case of 15 or 10 or 5. It's got to be 5, the shortest one. 5 minus 5 is 0. Okay, there's no slack time there, 0 and 0, no slack time. No slack time, slack time, slack time. A big amount of slack time there. No slack time, no slack time, no slack time. That's our Backwoods Pass finished. Now let's have a look at the critical path. The critical path is going to be where we have the same values in EF and LF. or no float, no slack time. Sometimes this slack time is called float. So if we just discount the squares that have got float, the critical path will be all of the other squares. So the critical path includes from here, through here, through here, through here, and down to there. Because we had slack time, slack time, slack time, no slack time in the other there, so this is the critical path. If any one of these extends in value, that's going to change my end time. My earliest finish would then be extended. Likewise, if any of these are done in a shorter time, because we only use best guesstimates here for the durations, if they're done in a shorter time, that's going to be the path that affects the final timing for the project. Alright, I've done some notes that have a very similar project to this, and again I've used the same squares with the same legend, ES, SL, LS, etc. Please have a look at those notes, but it is confusing the first time that you go through and do this, and that's why I finished up making a video about it. And even the video is a bit rough and ready, but at least you can watch it a couple of times, see what I've done, and then do it yourself and see if you can make it work. This is Greg Moore for New South Wales TAFE. Thanks for watching.